Hello, everyone. So my name is Erika. I work for the Davey Tree Expert Company, and I have a split position where half of my salary is paid for by the USDA Forest Service. So I have a vast array of projects that I work on between the two organizations, all involved in urban forestry. So a little bit out of a little bit different habitat ecosystem that I'm working in than a lot of folks that have presented this morning. But we do pay attention to invasive species, and of course we're looking to the future to what we need to do to keep our urban forests going as our climate is changing. That's not going to move the slide forward. Hang on one second, and that is moving the slide forward. So collaborators and partners listed on this slide. A lot of people were involved in this project. My colleagues at the U.S. Forest Service who started this project, Greg McPherson, who's now retired, and Natalie Van Dorn. And we've got UC Davis folks, we've got cooperative extension folks, and then at the bottom, all those organizations that were involved in planting, maintaining, donations of the trees involved in this project. The objective of the project is to help create a more resilient urban forest as to shift the palette of tree species and, in associated with the climate stressors that we're seeing now and we know are going to be occurring in the future. The goals of the project are to continue this on for 20 years up in Northern California, well, in the Sacramento, Davis area. We started this 6 years ago, and in Southern California and the Inland Empire and in the Southern California coast, we started that project 5 years ago. If funding allows, we hope to continue this study for at least 20 years. And we really are trying to test species that are seldom used in these areas, which we have been divided up into climate zones. These climate zones were designed by Greg McPherson in his 10 years ago. Natalie and I are hoping to reevaluate these in the coming years to make sure that they're still relevant as our climate changes. So really looking at qualities of urban trees and their resilience as the climate changes. So there's 5-6 steps to the process that we went through for choosing these trees. The first step was to gather information so that we could disseminate that information to our list of folks who were going to help us choose species from different places around the world that would fit the criteria that we found, not only in the climate trends and exposures that are going to be occurring in these areas, but also what we know we need as sorry, I was distracted. If somebody has a question, let me know. So what we know we need is what are priorities for urban trees, and I'll talk about those in a minute. So we use the CalAdapt model and to look at what our minimum temperature is going to be, what are our maximum temperatures going to be, what's precipitation, what's that going to look like, and what are the winds going to look like. I'm going to go through a few of these pretty quick. I'm assuming many of you are familiar with these resources. We took a look at the USDA hardiness zones. What were they, what are they going to look like in 75 years? We considered urban heat island effects, which in a lot of places that have scant urban forests, like the Inland Empire, are going to be even more of an issue in the coming time as things continue to heat up. So that was step one. We gathered all of that information. We had our list of folks who were going to help choose species, our experts. And so we got the information to them, and we got back lists of tree inventories from them. So our criteria was they needed to not be abundant in these areas. They hadn't been tested in these areas before. They were available for planting. If they're not available, or if there are not nurseries that are starting to grow these, because it takes a long time for the trees to grow and for to be able to use them in urban environments. Of course, they need to be successful in the changing climate. They need to provide shade, and they need minimal care. So we had 39 from 39. So we got our list of tree species from our experts with their knowledge of the climate information we gave them and those other criteria I just listed. We took those lists and we cross-referenced them with tree inventories from 39 communities. We considered rare species anything that was less than 0.01%. So if the recommended was less than 0.1% from these on these 39 inventories, then it made it to a semi-final list. And then we needed to run it through this matrix, this tree vulnerability matrix, which considered different habitat considerations, different physiological considerations, and then biological interactions, including invasiveness. So we ran it through that using, and we understand that we don't know oftentimes if these are invasive in this climate, and we did use Cal IPC and IPC, and we did a research search to try and find out what the potential was. So then we also needed to consider what's important in the urban system. Low biogenic emissions, low root damage. We don't want them lifting our sidewalks. We want them to live a long time, and we like high biomass trees so that they can store carbon. We need strong branch attachment, so they don't do this in our, fall onto our houses and our cars, and hopefully not people. We need low water needs, high salinity tolerance, because oftentimes we're using recycled water, which can have high salts in them. So then after all of that, we had our finalists, and for each climate zone, we have 12 species that we planted. And up here in the Inland Valleys climate zones, in the Inland Valleys climate zone, we have species from Australia, which do include a couple of acacias, which we understand have been issues in the past. We have one Carimbia species, which are similar to eucalyptus. So far, we have not seen issues with that as far as self-seeding. We have some species from the desert Southwest. We have some from Oklahoma and Texas. And we have a couple from Asia. So then step 4, now that we had our finalists, we got our experimental design together. We got them planted with our wonderful volunteers, and we're in the process of evaluating them every year. And we just this year ran some preliminary statistics on the growth and mortality. So in each climate zone, we have 5 sites, 4 park sites and 1 reference site. So the trees in the reference site get ideal treatment. They're all on university campuses in their agricultural experimental stations. The soil is amazing. They got regular water for the first 3 years. They got a little bit of pruning, mainly to keep them out of the mowers that go between the rows. And then on the opposite side, we have the park sites, which can be, as probably many of you have seen, urban trees and park sites can be treated fairly roughly by folks who come to utilize those areas. And oftentimes they're planted in turf and get scant water. So planting and maintaining, many city agencies and nonprofits, volunteers, UC staff helped us with this. Measuring and monitoring is done by Natalie and I every year. And then step 5, sharing results. And we do have a website, so climatereadytrees.ucdavis.edu. Currently, there's some funky things going on to it, and I no longer have access to make it look pretty again, but there are resources there, and I'm happy to send you any other resources, any information that you want on it that we've compiled. All right, so a little bit of our preliminary results that I just ran this the last month or so with our 2021 data we collected. And thanks to our station statistician, Nels Johnson, who helped write the code for R, and Natalie Van Dorn, who helped refine it. And we did a Bayesian evaluation. In this graph here, we've got mortality. And to the left of the dotted line that runs down the center here is less mortality, and to the right is more mortality. So the poor Corymbia, we saw it, and now this is just for the inland valleys. These are the trees up in Sacramento and in Davis. The poor Corymbia is having a really hard time, and the error bars did not show up. They got cut off, so the program didn't want to display it up here, but it would run this way. And error bars, large error bars, we have unfortunately small sample sizes due to funding. And then at the bottom here, the Acacia stenophila and the Quercus cambyi are doing amazing. We've got 100% survivorship, which we can see on this slide. We've got, this is all the species on the left. We've got our park percentage survival here. As you can see at the reference site, they're doing a lot more amazing, and then a total. So we do have some 100% in the parks. Another one that's doing really well is this Prosopis. And then we've got many 100% at the reference site, which is not reality, but if we put more money towards our park systems, it could be. I wanted to show you one of the highlights. This is the Quercus cambyi. This is at our reference site on the left side here. So you can see it has not been pruned up. We did have on the right side here, you can see my two colleagues, Natalie Van Dorn and Greg McPherson, and they've got a tree height pole here. This is doing some height measurements this summer on it. But these have grown extraordinarily well and high survivorship. And I think there might be another, yeah. And then here's one here. These have been pruned up. One of our, we were fortunate enough in Sacramento to have an urban forestry department. And one of the urban foresters did do some pruning on this to get that canopy up. And and a third one, a third one looking a little bit differently. This is with another park here with Greg standing there, but this clearly the foliage not as full, so not as much shade being created. And then we've got a little bit of growth, and we ran some analysis on the diameter at breast height growth, which is that is a measurement that we take. It's 137 centimeters from the ground up the trunk of the tree. We take the diameter of that, and that is just a standard measurement we use for urban trees. And you can see here, there's less DBH growth to the left of that dotted line and more DBH growth to the right. So up here, this Dalbergia is doing really well, growing really fast. It's quite an odd tree and structure. May still be okay for some urban use. The Maclura is doing less well than all these other ones. Here's Dalbergia, and this is the Inland Empire site. But similar things happening up here in the Inland Valley. This on the left, again, not pruned up. This is at the reference site. And this one here is at a park. And this is one of the issues we're seeing with Dalbergia. This is at a site up here in Sacramento, and these are root suckers coming up. So far, we have not seen it self-seeding, and this is a fairly open site. You can see there's non-native annual grasses on the other side of that bike path. We haven't seen any coming up over there, and we haven't seen anything seeding or sprouting beyond the root zone of this, and it's happening here, and oddly it's not happening at the reference sites. And I think we have one park down in Southern California that this is happening in. So that's a concern. Likely what's happening here is this site is very shallow rooted. I think because of the way it's constructed, you can see on the right, there's this human-made lake. So I don't know how deep the soil goes, but it's likely, that you can see the roots here. It's likely, unfortunately, a consequence of the watering. It didn't get deep watered, therefore the roots are more shallow, therefore getting these root sprouts coming up. But we are keeping an eye on those so we can deal with that if it gets out of hand. Another one that's doing quite well is the Acacia stenophila. And you can see on the right is one there at the reference site. On the left is the park, very similar in height and structure. The one at the park did get pruned up, so that's great. And unfortunately, though, we are seeing not only root sprouts, which you can see coming up here, and it's at that same site, shallow rooted, not deep watered, but we saw for the first time this year, it's starting to grow from seed. So this is only at one site, and this is a very clearly, everything there is invaders. Those are non-native annual grasses. Right beyond that is this gigantic irrigation cemented in canal. And on this side closest to us in the picture frame is a bike path, and then it's a complete urban subdivision behind us. But we don't want those getting into that irrigation canal, and so that's going to need to be dealt with sooner than the Dalbergia. And then the last one I was going to show is just what we expected, is that the trees at the reference sites, which are at the reference site, which are on the right-hand side here, and the trees compared to the trees at the park sites, their growth at the reference site is clearly a lot bigger. They're further away from this dotted line here. So these are definitely growing. This is again DBH growth compared to the park sites. And I just wanted to highlight this tree because I love this tree. It's beautiful. This Prosopis. This is at a reference site, so growing quite well. A little bit different at a park site. We're hoping to work with some nurseries to get them to grow this not multi-trunked, to start getting them to train them up. That would be excellent, especially if we don't get basal suckers from it, which we tend to find with some when we try and train them up to be single. We get these basal suckers, with oftentimes in urban settings they don't get dealt with, and then they become this unmanageable tree. So any questions? There is the website, and then you can find me at erika.teach@davey.com. And I will be on, I'll stay on until the end of the session for any questions that come in there too.
Sure, we do have an immediate question for you, which is,
Okay.
Is there any test for invasiveness?
We didn't do any test as far as were we able to get our hands on, say, seeds to conduct something ahead of time. That was not done. I know a literature search was done. This was before I came onto the project. And really what we're doing is keeping our eyes on the surrounding area. Fortunately, the places that these are planted in are already highly disturbed and fairly open around it. So we'll be able to see if they, the dropping of the seed or any, like in the case of the Dalbergia, if there's any like wind dispersal. None of the ones up here are dispersed by birds, so that's good. So we are keeping our eyes on those in those areas, and we'll be able to deal with them like the acacia if it starts to get out of hand. because we don't want another Pistachia chinensis, which we now see in our more open spaces because it's escaped and very widely planted up here.
And another question for you is, do those acacia have thorns?
No, and nor do the Parkinsonia, which is that's been a great tree. We're not, I mean, it's a beautiful tree. We've had success with it down south. But up here, it really needs to be staked and brought in. The canopy grows amazing, but the root structure does not grow as fast. So if they're going to get planted up here, they need to really, there's management issues. So they need to be brought in and they need to have 4 lodge poles on them to keep them supported until those roots can take hold. So yeah, none of them have the Maclura, the Prosopis, and the Parkinsonia and the acacias, none of them have thorns. Although they were bred not to. So put it up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erika.